Israel and Palestine, the real history. If you're watching this video, then there's a good chance that you have heard about the current conflict in Israel and Palestine. But did you know that it might actually be possible to trace the roots of this conflict back thousands of years? Well, if you want to hear about some of the most important moments in the history of Israel and Palestine, then stick around, because today we'll be looking at some of the most pivotal events that ultimately led to the modern-day conflict. We'll start with the ancient period, then move into the early modern period, ending with the beginning of the 20th century. The region was ruled by various empires, including the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Greek Empire. During this time, the Jews also faced many challenges, including attacks from neighboring peoples, and the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BC. During this time, the area was home to a diverse population of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. These explorers and missionaries often brought with them a desire to convert the local population to Christianity or to establish control over the region. One of the earliest and most influential proponents of this idea was the French philosopher and writer Léon Pince, who published a book called Judaism, Its Goals and Its Means in 1881. In his book, Pinske argued that the Jewish people needed their own state in order to survive. They were still subject to the whims of the Ottoman Empire and were often not treated fairly. When World War II ended in 1945, the British were ready to end their involvement in Palestine. They decided to hold a vote to allow the people of Palestine to decide whether they wanted to establish a Jewish state. The vote was held in 1947, and the majority of the people voted in favor of partition, which would divide the region into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab. However, the region was never partitioned, and the British left in 1948. The situation is complex, and there are strong opinions on both sides. It is important to understand the history of the region in order to understand the conflict today. The ancient history of the region goes back thousands of years, and the people who live there today are the descendants of those cultures. The modern conflict began in the early 20th century when the Zionist movement began to gain support. This led to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Today, the region is still occupied by Israel, and the Palestinians are still fighting for their freedom and independence. This led to the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1948, which resulted in the establishment of the State of Israel and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. There are many different perspectives on this history, and it is important to consider all of them in order to gain a comprehensive understanding of the conflict. We highly encourage you to do your own research and explore the history of Israel and Palestine from multiple perspectives. When World War I began in 1914, the region became an Ottoman war zone, and the Jewish population was caught in the middle. And do not forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Thanks for watching. Eventually, the British took control of the region and issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917. The declaration stated that the British government viewed favorably the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people while ensuring the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. The region has been home to many different cultures and civilizations throughout history, and the people who live there today are the descendants of those cultures. The modern conflict in the region is the result of centuries of oppression and dispossession. The Jewish people have faced persecution in Europe for centuries, and they were finally able to establish a state in Israel in 1948. However, this came at the expense of the Palestinians, who were displaced from their homes and have been living under Israeli occupation ever since. This declaration was seen as a major victory for the Zionists, and it gave them hope that a Jewish state would soon be established. He also believed that the land of Israel had a special place in Jewish history and culture, and that it was the natural homeland of the Jewish people. They make up the majority of the population in the region, and they have their own institutions and infrastructure. However, they still face many challenges. For example, in 1834, the British consul in Jerusalem reported that there were 70,000 Europeans who had visited the Holy Land that year, compared to only 1,000 who had visited in 1700. This growing interest in the region would eventually lead to the establishment of the State of Israel. The Jewish people continued to live in the region, though they were often subject to discrimination and persecution. In the 19th century, however, the region began to change. Despite these challenges, the Jews continued to live in the region and maintain their religious and cultural identity. Before we start, just a warning, this is a very sensitive topic, and there are strong opinions on both sides. This video does not take a stance on either side. and is simply an educational exploration of the history of the region. Zionism is a movement that supports the establishment and maintenance of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The first Zionist Congress was held in 1897, and it was attended by delegates from around the world. At the Congress, delegates discussed the goals and methods of the Zionist movement, and they agreed to work towards the establishment of a Jewish state. In fact, some of the oldest archaeological sites in the world can be found here, such as the Neolithic site of Jericho, which dates back to around 9000 BC. However, the people who would become known as the Israelites would not arrive in the region until much later. According to the Bible, the Israelites were led to the land of Canaan by their leader Joshua, who conquered the region and divided it among the 12 tribes of Israel. The Israelites established their kingdom in Canaan around 1000 BC, and for centuries they lived alongside other peoples, including the Phoenicians, Philistines, Moabites, and Ammonites. Anyway, let's get started. Ancient times. The ancient history of the region that is now Israel and Palestine goes back thousands of years. During the period of the Second Temple, which lasted from the 6th century BC to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, early modern times. In the early modern period, the region that is now Israel and Palestine was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. One of the first major changes was the arrival of European explorers and missionaries who were interested in the Holy Land. The idea of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine was first proposed in the early 19th century by European Jewish intellectuals, who were inspired by the rising nationalism of the time. Another important development was the beginning of Zionist activity in the late 19th century. Despite the support for Zionism growing in Europe, the reality for Jewish people living in Palestine at the time was far from ideal. However, the road to independence was long and difficult. So what happened to the Palestinians? Well, those who remained in the region became known as the Palestinians, and they continued to live there. Today, conclusion. The history of Israel and Palestine is a long and complicated one. Today, the region is still occupied by Israel, and the Palestinians are still fighting for their freedom and independence. It is important to note that this is just a brief overview of a very complex and nuanced history. That's all for this video. Let us know what you thought in the comments below.